Good afternoon, everybody. I'm hoping everybody's well today, even though we've done the morning with Zoom. We've had good breaks. Can everybody hear me? Good, okay. So we have a good panel with us today, but it's a little smaller than I expected. We're expecting a couple other people to come and join us, and they might be having technical difficulties, I'm not sure. But with us today, we have Heather McMilin from Homeward. Heather has a Master of Architecture degree and a Bachelor of Environmental Design from MSU. She's been with Homeward since 2003, and she focuses her professional strengths on developing, preserving, and shaping home creation and development policy across Montana. We also have Jennifer Wheeler with us. Jennifer graduated from Columbia Falls High School. She used her self-earned college money and bought a house at 19 years of age. She started her career at Glacier Bank in 2000 and worked her way up to a commercial loan officer position, which she has held since 2007. She currently serves as a vice president of the Kalispell branch. I know Jennifer has saved bacon a lot from a developer perspective. So thank you, Jennifer. And we also have Ellie Ray. Ellie has over 6 years of experience in public sector planning. She's a planner with the City of Helena. She serves as a housing policy coordinator, a grant coordinator, an ADA coordinator, in addition to her general municipal planning duties. That sounds like Ellie wears a lot of hats. She was the staff lead on the city's downtown zoning code update and has assisted in the formulation and management of the city's urban renewal districts. Welcome, Ellie. And I think for right now, we have a couple questions to start, but before we get into the questions, I'd like to take a little poll and see if we could put poll A up on the screen and just get a sense of who's in the room with us today. Okay. And we'll leave the poll up for just a couple seconds more. And if we could see the results now. All right, so, oh wow, so we have a lot of service providers in the room. That's really good to know about. The next one looks like funders and property and asset managers. So we'll try to be ready for your questions. And if we could put the next poll up, we just have one more that goes with it. And maybe we could see the results of that next poll now. All right. So more than 10 years, almost equally split with 3 years or less. So that's good to know too. Helps us get a sense of where people are at in terms of their professional careers. So I thought we would start this afternoon's questioning and grilling with Jennifer Wheeler first. I think Jennifer has some really good insight into the financing and what's going on in our financial world as it relates to development projects. And the question we have for Jen is, what are some of the current trends you're seeing in lending, particularly for affordable housing development? And are you evaluating risk differently for these projects now than you are in the past?
Okay, can everyone hear me? Perfect, thanks Heather. So before COVID, the banking industry, we were actually rolling along pretty good. We were thankful that we were no longer in the recession. Banks were pretty strong, borrowers were borrowing, but just in a matter of a few weeks, the world of banking experienced a level of disruption that changed everything that has been the norm in financial services. So there's not only been a change in the way that financial institutions conduct their business, but it actually put a lot of weight on the employees just due to the triple P loans that we had to do for the CARE Act. We had to do hundreds of thousands of PPP loans just in a matter of 6 weeks, and we had people coming in at 3 a.m. and leaving at midnight to try to get these into the SBA so that we can get the money back into the business owners and pay the employees, because what we all know is that the stimulus checks, they were a little late. Unemployment lines, the phone calls weren't getting answered, or you're on hold for hours at a time. So there's a bit of a slowdown, not just because banks didn't want to lend, it's just we just couldn't get to our normal business lenders or borrowers. We had to put so many people of just normal, hey, we want a rate reduction, hey, we want to buy a piece of equipment, we want to buy a house. We had to put them on hold. And as my friend Heather, I had to apologize so many times, just saying, I'm trying to get to you, but I just can't. But we ended up doing, just at my little division, over 1,500 in 6 weeks, and that's what we do probably in 9 months. In regards to how we're looking at lending right now, we're looking at the industry. So we all know in Montana, we rely so much on the tourist industry. So if we had a hotel or a restaurant that comes in and asks us for a request, we're going to look at them a little bit closer to see what their liquidity is, just to see if there is another slowdown. Can they get through it? In our local community, our hotels got hit, our restaurants got hit, but our manufacturers and our contractors, there's so many houses that are still being built. There wasn't a slowdown there. The challenge that we are having, and this does affect my LIHTC projects, is our interest rates. So my index at the beginning of February, it was well over 2%. Right now, today, it's just hovering under 1. So where are those rates going to be? In my projects, some of them might close in 4 months, and some of them might close the first quarter of next year. So it's really hard to gauge where that interest rate needs to be, not only for construction, which is going to affect those costs. It's also going to affect your perm load if the project has the ability to sustain any debt service, and if they can't, then there's more of a heavy need for that soft debt. So it's a lot of creativity that we're having to look at this year, specifically for LIHTC.
Thank you for that answer, Jennifer. That was great. It looks like we have Tyson O'Connell, who has just joined us. And Tyson is with Wish Camper Partners. He manages the company's more complex tax credit rehabilitation projects. He has a bachelor's degree with a double major in economics and sociology from Macalester College, and received a law degree from the University of Montana School of Law. And oh no, we have Helena Habitat. I'm sorry. I thought it was Tyson O'Connell.
You have both, Bonnie.
Oh, I both. Okay.
Everybody's here now. We were really on it coming back.
Yeah, you were on it.
So sorry to make everybody rush getting on, but awesome to see everybody on now. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, we have another question, and I'm just looking in the Q&A panel to see if there's anything for Jennifer. We don't have anything right yet. I think our next question would be for Ellie. What are some of the most significant ways that local regulations impact housing affordability, and what can cities and counties do to address affordability?
So I would say, thank you for having me, first of all. I would say that there are a myriad different ways that local jurisdictions can have an impact on affordable housing provisions within a community. I think one of the things that you have to start with is going from the top down, looking at the policy level. In the city of Helena, one of the things that we've been operating off of is the housing needs assessment that was completed for the Tri-County area of Lewis and Clark, Jefferson, and Broadwater counties in 2018. And we've been using that to inform our other policies as relates to housing. So key to this is actually making some relevant updates to our growth policy, which have been underway for about 1.5 years, I want to say, and are set for adoption in the summer. And related to that, one of the things that stems from the growth policy then is our zoning regulations. So one of the things that we were really proud of earlier this year was the passage of some really important updates to our zoning code as relates to your district dimensional standards. And I know that many of the people listening in are not people that are necessarily super well versed in the world of zoning. So basically what we did is we've said that when you have a lot that you want to develop, we're lessening some of the regulatory burdens that would restrict how much you can build out that parcel. So this is going to hopefully mean that in the coming years, we're going to see more units developed. One of the things that's unique about Helena and the state of Montana and probably the wider region is that we don't have single family zoning. So across all of our zoning districts, you are allowed to have more than one unit by right, at least two, in most districts more. So this is a really big deal for us to have been able to do this, because a lot of our lots are really tiny little lots that came from the late 1800s when the city was platted. And so now people have more ability to actually build them appropriately to their desires. So that is one area. One other thing that we did at the same time is we put forward an ordinance that was passed by the City Commission to reduce fees for affordable housing developments. And this is a pretty big deal for some of our housing developers, especially the nonprofit ones, where, you know, getting this refund of maybe 5 to 6 digits even of money is going to help really pencil out a project. So we have been working on the application. It's been finalized so that different developers, including wish camper developers, could potentially utilize for a reduction of fees on new developments and redevelopments of affordable housing in the community. So Rocky Mountain Development Council are going to be our guinea pig in going through this process before the City Commission next Tuesday, in fact, for their 85 unit Red Alder project. Some communities, though, do have impact fees that are imposed for development. So another tool that other places could use if they do have impact fees imposed, and I believe Bozeman's an example of that, would be to reduce some of those fees so that you can then also, again, help a developer, private or nonprofit, get their project to be cheaper on a per unit basis. So those are some things. Another tool in the toolbox would be inclusionary zoning. This is not something the City of Helena has been looking to move forward with, but I do want to bring it up because other communities in the state have done it, like Bozeman. And basically what happens here is that there's a mandate made so that when you're developing an affordable, or a housing development, I should say, you're required to ensure that a certain number or percentage of those units are actually classified. And then if you do have the option to offer that and or also get a fee in lieu for developing those units so that that money then goes back to the jurisdiction, can go into a pot and then be used for future affordable housing developments in the community. So those are some things. Another thing that we have a lot of city-owned land, and we've been trying to review them to see which ones can be surplused. A couple different things that we've been looking to do with that. One thing we have done is with a lot that is in our downtown that used to be our old bus depot. We've actually been able to work to sell that on to private developers who are going to include market rate units in that development. We're really excited that this was able to move forward. So there are deed restrictions that have been applied so that that can be done. That was a pretty big deal. Another thing that we're looking to do, we'd like to do in the future, and we've been trying to coordinate with different nonprofits in the state to figure out how to do this, including Helena Area Habitat for Humanity, is to try and create a community land trust somewhere in the downtown or the wider community. This is certainly a challenging thing for us to try and consider doing, but we're hopeful that we're going to find the appropriate lot or lots that we can make this happen on. And that would basically allow for the development of more affordable home ownership opportunities in our community. So I think we will get there, I'm sure, in coming years. It's definitely a key priority of the City Commission. And I should note, all these things that I've been mentioning have been directives that, or action items rather, that came from the housing needs assessment and have been working through our growth policy and so forth. So it really is important that whatever level of government you're at, that you have those high level policies that you can, use to inform all of your activities. And another thing that we routinely do, of course, is working on grant sponsorships. So we have, in the City of Helena, been approved for CDBG housing rehabilitation funds. So we can use these, our intention at least is to use these for single family homes that are in desperate need of critical health and safety updates and improvements to get them to be more stable housing stock for at least a generation or two to come. So we're working with the Department of Commerce to move that forward right now. And hopefully in the next year or two, I'm guessing at least, we will be able to get some applicants on board to work through that. We also sponsor people for general planning grants to figure out what to do to get more affordable housing development. We sponsor for home investment partnership grants to Department of Commerce, and we're excited to see what's going to move forward with the CARES Act funding that was set aside for the CDBG program too. And this was mentioned earlier in earlier sessions for this conference by Julie Flynn. So fingers crossed we'll be able to do something with that, and maybe even help with the establishment of more sheltering opportunities in the community, because it's not just this affordable housing. We need to have all these different stepping stones with shelters and other permanent supportive housing opportunities at different levels of the economic strata. So those are some things that we're working on. And I know that, and this is something Heather might be able to speak a little bit more to because she lives in Missoula herself, but the city of Missoula, relatedly, were able to utilize some tax increment financing dollars to help with the procurement of an old motel. I believe it's in the downtown or very close to the immediate downtown. And they're going to use that for sheltering opportunities. I think some of what they were hoping to do programmatically with that is changing slightly, but it's very exciting that they were able to leverage some of those funds to help with COVID response, and then can utilize the structure going forward for other housing activities. So those are some things. And I think one of the biggest things, I don't work for a county, but I would say that for counties, it's definitely imperative where you have your population centers that are just outside of cities, that you're coordinating with cities to effectively plan for growth for the future. It's important that people can live as close as possible to their job centers. It has a huge impact when it comes to transportation costs that they have to bear. And in city limits, we obviously have building code standards that ensure that housing is built a certain way and is as efficient as possible when it's built, and ensuring that there's some parity with development standards, and maybe even those building standards, although it's hard for counties, is something that can be considered. And I'm sure that Jacob, who I know develops a lot in the county, can speak to that, and Heather as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was a good discussion of some of the latest and greatest ideas for getting more housing on the ground. So we appreciate that. I want to just mention real quickly that this is an interactive discussion. We are expecting people to put forward questions for the various panelists. So don't be shy about putting a question into the Q&A box. Let's see, how about Tyson? We have a great question for you. As communities struggle with how to meet the need for homes that are affordable, we continue to see, and I'm sure that Ellie is aware of this too, the pushback from neighbors who don't want these projects in their backyard. How are you navigating not in my backyard attitudes when proposing affordable housing?
That is a great question. Whoever put that forth. I think it's very common to get, we do both new construction and we do rehab projects here at Wishcamper Development Partners. And we deal with it on both, quite frankly, but typically on a rehab projects, we deal with it considerably less, and it's usually one or two people. And actually they usually support it pretty soon after you tell them what you're doing, because you're typically taking a underutilized or blighted or run down building and making it considerably nicer. So it's almost always a benefit to the neighborhood and to the community. So those are pretty easy to handle on rehabs, but on new construction, I'm sure some other people can speak to this too, but we find I think we always get some sort of Nimbyism, and it depends on where you're building the housing and what the neighborhood is like. But I just went through a public process on a project we're doing. It's in Bend, Oregon. And there was a very small but concentrated campaign, which turned out to be about 5 people. but they were contacting their county commissioners. Our project was actually in the city, but it's right next to the county, and they were contacting the city, and they were bringing up the typical sort of stigmatism that goes with affordable housing. And I think the biggest part of it is educating people on why it's important to have this affordable housing, and then educating them on what we're actually building. I mean, you look at some of the affordable housing projects around Missoula or Helena or wherever they are, and they're typically, it would be hard to tell to me that they're not market rate housing. In fact, they're often very, very nice compared to what other options are in the community. So a lot of it is just education, quite frankly, and understanding and looking at people in the eye and telling them, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to manage it going forward, and here's how we're going to maintain things. But I have to say, I would be surprised if it didn't happen on most projects because of stigmatisms or prejudice or lack of knowledge. So it's something every developer should be prepared for and should try to get out in front of it early in the development. Could you hear me?
Yes, we could.
Okay,
We
I've got
could.
these headphones.
We.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. I'm just trying to mute when I'm not speaking, and it's taking me a second to unmute. So, and I think I just need to check in with Katie Biggs. Do we have questions in the question and answer yet that we'd like to take?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw you guys your first question. You guys can keep going. This is a question from left field. Missoula is running out of aggregate gravel pit capacity. Trucking it in from far away will be very expensive. Pricey concrete equals high housing construction costs. Is it too far afield for affordability advocates to get involved with, or is there any kind of connection there? What do we do essentially about the rising costs?
Right. Yeah, that's a tough question. Heather, do you want to take a swing at that?
I have to appreciate, I'm so glad we asked all people to be on this panel, because people that know me, I have so much in my head and it's hard to communicate, and we've broken these into pieces. But I think costs in the development equation are what matter and prohibit us from being able to, build more. And so to that specific question, and I'll answer my piece, I know the question's coming toward me, I'll answer it a little more in depth there, but costs matter. I mean, it is important. The zoning matters, the public opinion matters, the lending market matters. It all comes down to that root of, can you actually build it or preserve it or insure it? And I think we all need to be playing in each other's courts a little bit more and understanding the pieces. And that's why I like the spectrum we have today, is that we all have to have a voice. If I talk about homes people can afford and testify to that, people are like, yeah, sure. But if I have my contractors and my shop owners and my policy people saying it, that's the village voice that's most important. So I do think that it matters, and that cost and how you construct is the lifeblood of what we do. And so we should participate and care about those issues. I'm
muted again. Sorry. I'll figure it out, I promise. Okay, that was a great question. Katie, do we have another question? I see some numbers in the Q&A. Do we have
We have a couple more coming in. We have Representative Dave Fern, and he is building a wish list for statutory reforms for legislatures to enhance affordable housing. He has tax credits and land trust definitions, it looks like, on that list. If you guys want to pop over to the chat and give some more potential wish list items, that'd be great. First questions go with us focusing on affordable housing. How is that impacting the over rental market, as we are seeing the rental market is very high right now with not the best quality units?
Gosh, I think a lot of panelists could speak to that one. Heather, do you want to start, and maybe we can get Tyson on too?
Sure, I'll try to be brief, and we can bounce between questions from outside and then our internal ones. I do think that when you look at the spectrum of housing, there are a lot of places. Every community in Montana faces issues, whether it be lack of new housing stock or an overage of housing stock, or a market that just they fill their units as fast as they can build them. And so when you're looking at the equation, I guess trying to understand the root of the question is that I think the market does address components of the need. It's not necessarily the exact right product, but it still doesn't quite get to the root of some of the projects that we all build or what's truly affordable. And I just think it's really important to look at each of those pieces and to really understand the need. And that's when we compete for funds. The need is hard to articulate and kind of see through the noise of that market condition. And so I'm not sure if, Katie, if you want to repeat the question, I'll try to be a little more direct, but and maybe Tyson, others could throw in at this point.
Yeah, just to repeat it one more time, with us focusing on affordable housing, how is that impacting the over rental market, as we are seeing the rental market is very high right now with not the best quality?
Anybody else want to chime in on that? Tyson or Jacob?
I'll chime in.
Tyson, you're muted. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry about that, everybody. I'll chime in on that. And I actually, just to go back to what you mentioned earlier, Bonnie, I heard Representative Firm say there's a wish list for the legislature. And one of the other things I would want to make sure that we mentioned that the Montana Housing Coalition is working on is last session, we passed a Montana Coal Trust loan for affordable housing. And I think it was $15 million. And it's been used and it's been allocated for a number of really great projects across Montana. So that was something that I know the Housing Coalition worked on for a long time. And I believe the plan was to go back to the legislature and ask for an additional allocation during this next session. The lobbying efforts are completely different now. We can't meet in person because of COVID, all of these different things, but that's something I just want to make sure everyone's aware of. It was a big win for affordable housing in Montana, and it's been fantastic. It's been flexible, and it's made some deals happen that wouldn't have happened. So kudos to everybody on that. And I just want to make sure that Representative Fern knows about that. And as far as the overall housing market, I think what it was saying, if I'm understanding that question correctly, Missoula's a case in point. There's a lot of different places, and I hate to go back to another project out of state, but this one just happened to me in Bend, Oregon, and I know because my Uber driver, when I was going to a public meeting, told me, "Oh, you do affordable housing? That sounds great." I live in a remodeled Shiloh Inn in Redmond, which is not even Bend. She pays $1,600 a month for a 3-bedroom unit, and it's a 1970s project. The same units in our project in Bend or in any other affordable housing project in Bend will be available for, let me just look, for about $1,100 a month. And they'll be brand new. They'll be in a better location, in my opinion. I mean, whether we're building it or somebody else. So I think overall in the market, it's clearly many communities are underserved on affordable housing. We all know that. The housing stock that people are renting is old and tired and overpriced right now. And that's market driven. We can't change that. So I think it just pushes the issue of affordable housing to the front. I think it was already a big issue before March happened and COVID hit. And I think now it's even a bigger issue. You have housing is clearly a #1 priority for many people in our country and something that was underserved, and now it's even more important. So I don't have an answer to it except for that's what I'm seeing in the markets.
I'll add a little quick tidbit. The market should build what it can build and rent for what it can rent. And a lot of the things that we see built that may not be of high quality, like the Shiloh Inn, it's still a solution. It's putting a roof over somebody's head. We need that as much as we need the deed restricted affordable homes that we build. But inevitably, the market will take as much as it can and as high as it can. And we're down here, and there's this gap that gets created, and there's still this missing. And so policy work, like City of Whitefish, they are in a unique situation, but their housing policy addresses up to 150% area median income. It's a different tier of assistance above the 120, but it's still there, and identifying that there is a distinct gap no matter what community you're living in. And I think that's important when you're talking workforce and all the token words about what we're building, but you need to have zoning provide housing type options for what we build, and you need to have different targeted income focused rent levels, essentially, because there's nothing driving that middle. And I think that's what's important and what we worry about.
Absolutely. I want to take a minute and just introduce Jacob, because I didn't introduce him before. So Jacob Kuntz is the executive director of the Helena Area Habitat for Humanity. And he is able to combine his love of carpentry and nonprofit management in that role. He brings his experiences and training as an educator, mediator, home builder, and community organizer to the work of housing. He has a master's degree in conflict resolution from Trinity College, Dublin. And we have a question for Jacob, and that ties into what we've been talking about in terms of both prices and trying to fill in that gap. Jacob, as we look at development, not only of affordable rentals, but also home ownership opportunities, what are some of the new approaches you're working on or are most excited about for affordable home ownership preservation and development?
Thanks, Bonnie. Apologies for the orange tan. I'm not sure what's going on here. Yeah, we've got some things that we've been working on lately, and I think the question about access to affordable materials and whether or not housing advocates would be a part of that, I think that's a great question. I'd include into that infrastructure costs. As a builder, developer, I think Habitat's in this position where we can kind of see all sides of the equation when it comes to understanding the challenges from a planning perspective, from a developer's perspective, and then from a builder's perspective in those areas. So we've been working on this over the last several years of building the organization, trying to find different ways of building so we could just do more to meet the need. And so we've been working more with Trust Montana and we're about ready to break ground on a project in Red Lodge, where Helena Habitat is actually partnering with Red Lodge Area Community Foundation on a single family housing on a land trust within the city limits. And so we've been looking more at land trusts. Ellie mentioned land trust questions that have come up in the city of Helena. And we see this as a way of building the stock of housing that is permanently affordable. So Habitat for a long time has had that home ownership model, but we were losing a certain percentage of the stock of housing to the market, especially in markets where we saw the appreciation of homes very quickly outpace our ability to restrict or examine deed restrictions and the like. And so we're spending more time examining, when there is an investment in a community in housing, whether it's a private investment, a public investment, that we're finding ways to restrict that so it can serve generations of families rather than just one family, while including the benefits of home ownership, including equity growth in that model. So in Red Lodge, we're looking at homes that will be constructed sub 150,000. These are single family designed homes, single car garage, that fit very well with the neighborhood, are super insulated and net zero capable homes if they have array. And so quality built homes that fit into the community so they can't be looked at and picked out as affordable housing. And then these are land trust properties so that when a home comes up for resale, we can keep them in the stock of housing. So we've been doing, we're working more with land trusts, great partnership with Trust Montana, hoping to do more of it in Lewis and Clark, looking at a couple properties right now that we can put into the land trust as well. And then we're moving more to a developer role as we begin to examine how do we create, not just isolated homes throughout the community or small plots of lands with 6 to 12 houses into large communities. Is this a partnership that can be done with the private sector, public sector, perhaps industry involved in creating communities? And these are all big questions, but as Habitat grows and as we're doing more, we're examining all those different areas. Habitat is a traditionally volunteer-run organization, and this year we're actually looking at one home that will be all subcontracted. There's only so many volunteers that we have, and so do we have a certain part of the homes that we build subcontracted laborers working with the construction field here in Helena and beyond, and while also retaining the character of the education aspect of Habitat that includes volunteers. We never want to lose that, while creating mixed income communities where perhaps we have a certain percentage of a neighborhood that we would develop be land trust homes interspersed with market rate homes, and maybe homes that are different income levels, perhaps some that are done through our mutual self-help model through the USDA, where families bond together and build in mass each other's homes with nobody moving in until they're all completed. And then we're looking very heavily, now that Helena has been had some great changes to zoning and to the percentage of a lot coverage that we can work. We're looking at this infill development, purchasing or examining lots within the city limits so we can examine infill opportunities. And I will say that we're having more response from community members, from local government officials, as far as that, in treating this as an investment in the community that is long-term, and that so we're having a lot more success when it comes to that. But the future of Habitat is large-scale land development, partnership with other nonprofits to build perhaps multifamily housing, single-family housing, industry, market rate homes, and trying to figure out how do we strategically develop right outside the city limits so we can access infrastructure so that we can build with density in mind. And these are all questions that are swirling around Helena, Lewis and Clark County as we try to look at zoning. We want to make sure that families are living in these mixed income communities so that we don't create certain areas that are lower cost housing and some areas that are higher cost housing, but we try to intermix the homes that we're building and make it impossible for people to tell the difference between the homes. So there's quite a bit there, but maybe I'll leave it at that. But that's what we're working on at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think, Katie, you have another question or two from the audience. Why don't you go ahead and throw that out there?
Yeah, I've got several. First, directed back toward Tyson, Representative Fern said they're in the process of reauthorizing the Coal Trust work on the interim committee in July. So,
oh, that's great.
More to come there. Several people have asked about the fact that the session description mentioned conversations regarding regulatory hurdles. Could the panelists share the top 1 to 2 regulatory hurdles they experience, and if they had a magic wand to wave, what would they change?
Who would like to go first on this one?
Heather.
Tyson, you're up.
I'll tell you one of the regulatory hurdles that we face, and I'll be very happy to say it in Helena, it has not been an issue at all, but it's just getting permits. You have your financing lined up, you have everything ready to close, and I haven't had it be a problem necessarily on our Montana projects, and things have moved together very smoothly and efficiently. It like goes into a black hole, and it's really frustrating when you have everything ready to go and the permits are basically imminent, and yet they sit around for weeks or even months. I mean, I know communities work really hard to try to shorten that time. But that's just one thing that I would waive. It hasn't been an issue on our Montana projects, but it's maybe other people have had a different experience. And if they haven't, I would thank the communities for continuing to expedite that process. I don't think any of us expect it to be, hey, we're submitting today, we need our permits tomorrow. But I think a lot of us would agree months or 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 months is the longest we've had to wait for permits when everything's ready to go is pretty frustrating when you have all of these other market factors that are potentially negatively impacting a project.
Yeah. And Heather?
Yeah, I would agree with Tyson. I mean, I'm going to keep going back to the equation. That component of if something is held up in that way where we have a timing issue with our lending or equity investment, it can affect a project by millions of dollars. And so, and I say that with a real project in mind right now. I'm lucky enough to live in Missoula and work in Montana. There's challenges with our market right now, and I'll talk a little more about that in a bit, but we have a project where we're trying to use the 4% model, and we ended up having to go through, we're in the process of just starting the minor subdivision on a donated parcel from the county of Missoula, which is fantastic. We're building in permanent supportive homes with services. It's a wonderful project, but it's been very difficult to get the jurisdictions, as Ellie pointed to, kind of on the same page, and we're there now, which is great. And so I'd say that the hurdles that we had going in, we're solving now because we have an equity investment letter signed, and we have to close by February 2021. And I'm worried about it now. And so we have to get through minor subdivision, and the city has sat down and they've prioritized, and they know this because right now, who needs credits? We don't know yet. The market is upside down. And so we have to make sure we meet that mark because we got into a tail end of an equity loan piece. So we're getting great pricing, and we don't know what the pricing is going to be tomorrow. And so we're very concerned about timeline. If we don't hit that, we could drop by millions of dollars. I mean, that's very simple because it's a very large project. It's a 4% underutilized. Brandon spoke to it in a previous session, highly underutilized 4%. The math gets really tight. And so what I am applauding the city of Missoula is having coordinated meetings in the middle of a pandemic with us, prioritizing with all their heads of their department, because minor subdivision, that there are have-tos you have to do with state law. And that is the only thing in theory that's going to hold us up. It's going to hit somebody's desk and move to the next one, move to the next one, move to the next one, and down the chain. I'm not Pollyanna. I've done development long enough to know something is going to go wrong. And so we will have plans. We're probably at plan G, E, and F, way down the list so far. But where we are right now, that's what that jurisdiction can do for us. And the city of Missoula is stepping up and making it a priority because they know how tight our equation is to actually pull this rabbit out of a hat and develop this project. So I think that's where Jacob described, he is working, he has his box, he does what Habitat does, but he's pushing on those edges. And Ellie's doing the same thing with policy. It's like we can't live in our silos, and we have to understand and work together and the why. Slowing down and saying, why does this matter? And having to explain to the jurisdiction, timing, equity market, low-income housing tax credits. Nobody on this call should have to understand how they work, but just we have to tell the story enough to understand why that timing is impactful, and it affects the dollar amount, because there's nothing we can do to control construction costs. I mean, we will do our damnedest, and we will speak when we can about it, but it's like we all have to kind of be in this village approach together. And so that's where I just want to say there's a great example. City of Bozeman is prioritized. Helen is doing great. City of Whitefish prioritized us in the food chain on a 9% tax credit project. And that's what matters. The zoning matters, land use planning, zoning, what land is able to be developed near infrastructure matters. All of those things tie together. And so I think that's important just to understand. Those hurdles need to be minimized, and you need to come from a place of working together versus it just being a battle. And I also think that we need to let Representative Gurney know that a state housing credit would help. We have very little, but yay, the coal trust is awesome. It went out the door in a heartbeat, and we're going to do more. We need to do that. A state housing credit, resources, anything we can throw into the pot to help hit those targets we were talking about, because we have a broad spectrum of need, and we need as much as we can get. And I'll throw it out there. I can see some of the chats. Kat, I know you live in Denver, and those projects get done with weed money all the time. We need weed money in Montana. We don't have enough state resources, so I'm just going to throw that out there from a policy standpoint too. So soft funds being able to help support these is very important.
I tag onto that, Bonnie. Is that all right?
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to. So when we talk about regulatory hurdles, I guess this is more of a sort of logistics and infrastructure hurdles, which we have a very low stock of building lots in Helena. You have to get very creative. That's throughout the state. Infrastructure is a major hurdle to anything we do. And I'm realizing, and I'm going to reveal my ignorance on some of the development portion of this, which, you know, I'm learning as we go, that infrastructure is one of the greatest hurdles that we have to developing affordable housing in Helena, and I think throughout the state is from what I've seen. And anything that we could do to be prioritizing infrastructure within communities to help lead to that density, which creates you know, developers being encouraged to build closer into neighborhoods instead of going further and further out is a huge challenge that we have. So issues of water and sewer, and then roads, and the costs associated with putting in roads, you know, going back to the materials questions, are some of the biggest challenges we face. I have right now 130 families waiting on a waiting list. I could be building a lot more than we're currently building. You know, we're building 8 homes this year. That is only restricted by the fact that I just can't find affordable lots that are small enough, or that we can build any type of density in order to serve the folks that we're working with. So we could very quickly be getting to actually meeting the need if we, you know, I think that if infrastructure was being thought about in line with these other topics. So.
Yeah, I think infrastructure is a huge need in Montana. I mean, we had to put in a lot of infrastructure for the project that I'm working on in Ronan, Montana, and it's been a real challenge to have to put in infrastructure on a tax credit project. I think that just makes it really hard. So definitely. Katie, do we have another question?
We've got questions for days. This one is for Jennifer. Jennifer, you spoke to the LIHTC debt market. Can some of you guys or speak to the current state of the LIHTC equity market? This is from Kat out of Denver. She's heard a number of equity shops being out of multi-investor fund equity, which tends to be the biggest buyer for Montana LIHTC products. In short, from June 16, 2020 to June 16, 2019, how is appetite and price comparing?
So I'm probably going to need Heather to back me up, because she knows what pricing she got on a couple of projects. But just personally, I've had 2 projects that their investor just recently backed out. And so now they're trying to find other investors, which are affecting, of course, how much money is going to go into the project. Glacier itself, actually, we started about 2 years ago. Instead of doing direct investment, we started going into investing in funds, because that way we can kind of spread out our money to affect more projects. And so that's been a pretty good thing, I think, for a lot of mine. Mine have been in most of those funds. But Heather, I don't know where the pricing is right now. I haven't seen anything recent.
Yeah, I'd say, and Tyson can toss in too, for the first time, well, let's say probably the second time in my 17 years, I'm a baby compared to a lot of people, but it's hard to tell. In that 202 home project in Missoula that you're working with us on, thank you. We put that RFQ out right when all this happened, and we got half the responses we should have. Missoula's in a high CRA need area, a hot market, all those things should have been, pricing should have been here. And I just think the unknown, and Libby talked about it earlier, nationally you're seeing this, but Montana, while we're isolated or insulated at some level, we're not. those outside markets are critical to the sale of those credits and the pricing. And when I say the price of a credit, I sell a credit, I turn it into $1 that I pay my contractor and all my people with. That pricing is so up in the air right now. We've seen fluctuations of 10 cents on the dollar, which is absurd. And I have really good partners that tried to give us a response and they just couldn't do it because you can't predict what's going to happen 2 months from now or 4 months from now because of the risk and what we're living in right now. And so when I spoke about that Missoula project, we happened to get in a multifamily fund that was closing and guaranteed returns. So we skated in, got it, and we're holding it. And that's why those timelines are so important. I don't know what we're going to see. I do know from a national perspective, I mean, we had this happen in 2008, 2006 through 8, when the banking world crashed, our equity markets crashed. So the feds gave us, they bought back the credits that were allocated to the state. They bought them back and held a reasonable price for development underwriting. So we have an example in place if that were to happen right now, but I don't know what it will be. And I think what I really am proud of on the last couple of our projects, we did get, for Whitefish was easy. I mean, it's right out Jen's back door, but their bank invested, Glacier Bank Corp invested in our equity fund for that 9% tax credit project. That helped insulate some up and downs. They knew the market. Getting local money invested in those national funds was critical. So I'm thrilled. We've been wanting to do this for years, and that model has worked. So that helps with the ups and downs that the national level is seeing, but it's still a challenge with the unknown. We just don't know if this is unique. When are people going to go back to physically working? How many jobs will be lost? I mean, there's just the unknown, and that when there's unknown, that's when the market is less predictable. And I haven't put a letter out lately, thank goodness. We have applications going in and hopefully have enough time to see where it goes. But Tyson, are you seeing any hiccups on your end or market-wise? Sorry, Tyson, I asked you a
I was
question.
trying to
There you
unmute,
go.
sorry.
Trying to unmute?
No, I think you did a good job of summarizing it, and I'm sure Kat is interested in it, and we're interested in it. So far, the multifamily, the multi-funds have held, but there seems to be uncertainty. I've heard stories of investors not having the same appetite they had 6 months ago. And I think from our experience, you just said you got half of the responses. We've kind of seen about that same thing, Heather. We've had good responses from the people that have long relationships with, but a couple of times they said that's just not in our, right now we don't have that need. So I think it's unfolding right now.
Right. Yeah, and so that puts the pressure back on us to underwrite at a lower price, which means we have to find other dollars to backfill. You can only go so low without it just not being feasible. So that, again, goes back to the equation and the components of the expenses of certain things, et cetera. But I know we'll get into that a little more as we go.
Yeah, I think the problem is even more pronounced for rural projects that aren't in a city center. There's just less interest overall, and I think they tend to be smaller, and so same kind of uncertainty there amplified in some ways. So Katie, we have another question, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the USDA has financed affordable rental projects in rural communities across the state, but many of these are getting old and in danger of being lost due to a complicated IRS tax on gain created by depreciation over many years. Is the state aware of such a problem?
Yes, the state is aware of the problem. The state is very aware of the problem. Yeah, and I think there's a lot going on to try and work with that, including that's where the Preservation Summit would come in that's happening shortly. I think the 24th, is that right, Katie? She's going to confirm for me.
Kaya will chime in on that after this session about the dates.
Perfect.
I have not been as involved, but I
Perfect. So Heather, I don't know if you are aware of exactly what the state is doing specifically here in Montana. That I know that there's been a lot of work both nationally and locally on how to address that issue, and is there a fix that can happen at the federal level, maybe even to eliminate the problem there, which would be really nice.
I think we'll definitely dive deeper into that at the Preservation Summit. Not trying to pawn that off.
Yeah.
It's just super complex. There's federal things that affect it. There's state law and code that affect it, and so we may have to navigate some waters to make that problem go away, or at least be minimized. And I don't have a current pulse on it. I know that we've been talking about it for years, and it just keeps coming down to this root issue. And we're already drinking out of a fire hose with need, and we have to figure this out.
Yeah.
For preservation is critical when it comes to all the resources we're talking about. It's one of the major players in the solution, and we just have to get there. So I really recommend, even though this virtual thing is killing my soul slowly, we do this again on the 24th and have this conversation specifically about these projects.
Okay, Katie, what's our next question?
Yeah, recognizing the issues in urban communities where there's benefit from the growth policies and zoning and building inspections, etc. What resources really help our very rural communities that face the same needs but the least support from developers?
Bonnie, do you want to just ask the question you told me you were going to ask me? Because it's
so
related.
The question that I had, I can go ahead and ask that. Yeah, so rural areas in particular frequently need smaller housing developments. And smaller housing developments are not always good tax credit developments. And given that non-tax credit money doesn't grow on trees, what approaches should we be using to get some of these smaller but still important projects on the ground?
Well, and we've jumped around, and everything we've talked about up until now factors into this. And so, I'm a Montana kid, 4th generation, and so I know a lot of our communities pretty well. And the problem's there, and to get there. But what we were just talking about, the equity market in federal credits, it's riskier to invest in credits in Lewistown than it is in Missoula or Bozeman. And so that affects pricing. We only have so many 9% credits. I do think that they are a good solution because they are the easiest credits resource to use because they're the most valuable. Let's put it that way. They'll pay for 70 to 80% of the total project costs, where 4% is like 40 to maybe 35% of the cost gets covered with those credits. What I can't say enough is that we really need to be looking at state resources, weed money, state housing credits, more coal trust. All of that matters because then we can fill the gaps in those smaller projects and those smaller communities and underwrite using credits at a lower level, and then being able to flesh out the whole project. Planning matters in those communities, infrastructure matters in those communities, zoning, all of that factors into the ability to do the projects. Now let's go down a different road we haven't spent any time on. Those projects are important, but how am I going to maintain them, operate and maintain them? We have projects all over Montana in a lot of rural communities, and it's even internally a difficult conversation to propose doing a project in a rural community because I don't know who is going to property manage it the way, and asset management. And on a smaller project, the risk of vacancy, if I had 2 or 3 vacancies on a 200-unit project,
Big deal.
So be it. If I have it on an 18-unit project, I can't pay the light bill. And so those are the more complex conversations we need to have. And so we've been looking really at, where can we have an aggregate portfolio of rural? Are we going to share expenses between projects, or are we working with a partner? I mean, the HRDCs are great. They cover the whole state, but they're tasked with all of their services, and some of them develop and some of them don't. But can we share our experiences, or the housing authorities? Can we throw in where we can address some of these long-term operational pieces and use our strengths? It's just difficult. The federal resources that come to the state are wonderful, and a lot of our partners who are here on the call today, but they come with strings that prohibit certain things. And so when it comes to procurement of general contractors in Lewistown, we are in a market right now where they're staying in Billings because they have plenty of work in Billings, or Great Falls or Bozeman. They're already strapped there. Why are they going to go to Lewistown? We're just in that environment. And so you have to get creative about how you put your projects together, get it into somebody's future pipeline. These are all things we're theorizing, but it's really important to know all these pieces and talk about them together as a group so that we understand. It's just as important, all the policy pieces in Lewistown, as it is in Missoula or Bozeman. It affects our ability to do those, have those properties perform. We need the local investment. We need Glacier Bank to care about the rest of the state so that they'll put money into a fund and help fill in that gap on the pricing, on tax credits or any other resources. And they have to be willing to land on a riskier development, but they know the Montana market better than outside banks do or investors do. And so that's where you have to look at it holistically. It's a challenge. If anybody else wants to throw in on that, we just had a conversation earlier. Cheryl is going to be filling some big shoes with Bruce, and she's bringing a lot of resources in. The permanent supportive housing and health care and housing, that is super important. We're working on a project in Lewistown as an example right now that's ideal, but that's going to strain the resources that are already strained. Preservation strains the resources already strained. We have our existing housing stock we have to deal with. We have new construction that we need to come up with, and we need to serve a broader bandwidth and do it more collectively. So resources, going back to the stuff we need the state to step up and do, and going after money that maybe not unique to our work, or that's in other people's silos that can help our projects, like historic preservation, if you're doing an adaptive reuse, and some of those resources, bringing them to the table to help spread the limited federal resources we have. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's kind of part of the bigger picture.
So you actually brought up a really good point in regards to, because when we had our projects in Great Falls and Havre and Hardin and Culbertson, we had a lack of contractors there coming in from out of state. So that is a very good point that you made about Lewistown.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in? Katie, let's go ahead and have our next question.
Actually, we are at our time frame.
Oh, we are.
So
oh my gosh.
Just so everyone knows, all the questions that came in that didn't get answered, we've been keeping track of, and we will move those to our mthousingpartnership.org website, and we should find answers for those questions there. So we've noted the questions that we did not get to, and appreciate all the panelists and the great questions we did get to.
Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. I think do we get a break next?
I'm going to chime in and give the next round of updates. Thank you, everybody. Obviously, tons to talk about and learn about and work on together. So thanks for sharing your perspective and expertise. It's been great. Just a few highlights I want to share. I think we're seeing cities across the state really jump in on zoning and planning conversations, and cities really recognizing the role that they have to play in affordable housing, which is exciting. We're also seeing the state stepping up, like Tyson talked about the funds that are coming from the state, and I just want to give a shout out to Representative Fern, who carried HB 16 in the last legislative session and has been a really strong advocate for affordable housing at the state legislature. And then at the state level, like Representative Fern is creating a wish list here for the state, Senator Tester is creating a wish list for the federal level. So I think we have some really great folks in all levels of government who are really trying to figure out what role they can play. And then I think you all heard about some of the great roles that developers and others in this sector are playing, issues around Nimbyism and how do we communicate better and well about why affordability is important and what it means, busting some of those myths, looking at new models for permanent affordability, and addressing infrastructure and rural challenges. So I wanted to call out also the Housing Preservation Summit that we have coming up. It is on June 24th. We'll have a slide towards the end of the day today, or maybe that's now. Let me check my script. to share with you guys a little more information about that. It's going to be 2.5 hours co-hosted with Enterprise Partners, who has a ton of experience in this field, and just been really exciting to have them working so closely with us in Montana. So if you have any interest in rural housing preservation, we hope you will join us on the 24th. Okay, I think we are good for now. We do have a 30-minute break before we come back for our last session and our award ceremony. We'll be back on at 2 o'clock, and